Marlborough Education Services, A2 Sociology, Unit 3, Beliefs in Society, Postmodernity and Religion. It would be difficult to point out a particular year when the modern era gave way to the postmodern, but having said that, some would say as early as 1945, and some say as late as the beginning of the 21st century. Personally, if pushed, I'd opt for the early 1970s as its genesis. Perhaps the easiest way to start developing an understanding about postmodernity would be to look at its economic aspects. One might refer to this facet of postmodernity as post-Fordism. The post-Fordist economy was based on mass production and mass consumption of standardised products and services. Yet post-Fordism, which, according to Daniel Bell, emerged in about 1973, was based on small-batch, flexible production. The consumer wasn't content with the same products and services as his neighbour anymore. Differentiation and specialisation became the dominant approach to satisfying customer needs. Under post-Fordist conditions, one also saw the declining influence of social class identity. Primary and secondary industries gave way to the new kingpin, the tertiary sector. Trade union membership declined, and traditional communities withered away as manufacturing and extractive industries closed down due to foreign competition and its lifeblood, cheap labour. The two homogeneous social classes had somehow lost their identity, as most of us now carried out some kind of non-manual occupation. Inequality remained, but it just didn't seem quite so obvious anymore. We ceased to define ourselves by our work, and most of us couldn't decide what social class we were, even if we were asked. Now we might move on to look at some other aspects of postmodernity. In a postmodern society, notions of truth become more contentious, or they simply become something relative. That is, we substitute truth for truths. We start to accept that our world is no longer comprised of definite answers and clear rules upon which there is a general consensus. We have gradually rejected many of the old values that gave us a clear sense of right and wrong, good and bad, and we now simply self-select the version of the truth we prefer, or that we find most convincing, or that we find most utilitarian. The postmodern world becomes a relativist one. Perhaps a useful practical example of all this was the case made by the Blair government to go to war with Iraq in 2003. The dodgy dossier, as it became known, claimed to be an authoritative account of the threat posed to the United Kingdom by WMD, or weapons of mass destruction. Yet the truth presented was something of a mosaic of plagiarised and unattributed sources. In short, it was a version of the truth the government wanted to believe because it justified their foreign policy objectives, something that was based on supporting the Americans in removing Saddam Hussein. So, we appear to be far more active in the assemblance of the truth than we ever were under modernity. Truth used to come from science or religious authority, whereas now we seek it out. In fact, according to Lotard, science has never had a monopoly on truth, and its use of language is similar to other forms of expression like history or philosophy. He explains this by saying that science is governed by protocols or accepted ways of thinking and operating, and as such, like other disciplines, it plays its own game with regard to expression, narrative, and making sense of the world. So for Lotard, Science is just another belief system. We have also ceased to believe in the inevitable march of progress associated with the classical sociologists of the mid-19th century. For Marx, it was the march of progress towards the establishment of a communist utopia, and for functionalists like Durkheim, it was an evolutionary process where society improved through the discoveries of positivist sociology. Yet for us, we talk about a risk society. Natural and man-made disasters, pandemics, and threats near and far, real or imagined, have made us all far less comfortable or optimistic in thinking about the future. This leads us to take more active responsibility for our own lives, in that we question more, we seek out knowledge more, and supporters of postmodernity as a concept argue that we benefit from a change in attitudes towards ontology. Postmodernity has seen us throw off the shackles of structures that we had hitherto been governed by, and we have become more sovereign. We make more choices about who we are and who we want to be. We construct our own identity, and we can be anything we choose, something easily done through the internet. Whilst this view might exaggerate the freedoms we have in society, because the poor are still poor, and this will always constrain them in many ways, there does seem to be more active choosing in life, rather than our lives being shaped and determined by the familiar structures of modernity. Postmodernity and religion. Firstly, modernists, who were convinced that religion was doomed, appear to have been mistaken. Science and religion don't seem to be mutually exclusive. Furthermore, while secularization has occurred amongst the Trinitarian churches, one might talk about a resacralization rather than a desacralization. Resacralization refers to a reawakening of our interest and concern with religious and spiritual matters. One might argue that this is a reaction to the relativism and uncertainty already discussed. As we lose old forms of meaning and authority, so we look for new forms, and as structures have less control over us, we are freer to make choices. Technology also plays its part in our active choosing, because the internet allows us to learn about and experience the religious or spiritual at the touch of a button. Whilst we might interact with distant others through cyberspace who share our particular religious interests, in the words of Grace Davy, we are believers without belonging in many ways. Mediated religion, where physical attendance and deference to clerical authority is required, seem less attractive to most of us these days. Perhaps New Age movements and spiritual development groups allow people to dabble in these things, and they can move on to something else when they get bored. Yet for Steve Bruce, the evangelical groups, the New Age movements, and fundamentalist believers are the exception, not the rule, and most of us remain secular. However, although Bruce's criticism of the postmodernist argument may have some credence when applied to the UK, if one broadens the unit of analysis, the rest of the world appears just as religious as ever. In short, it is notoriously difficult to measure religion, and as such, it is more about faith rather than membership, and things become even more complicated as we use religion for secular purposes, like getting our child into a good faith school, based on either making up or exaggerating our own religiosity.